Oh, what a film! What a lovely film! Director George Miller returns to the Mad Max series after a 30-year hiatus to bring Max Rokitansky back to the big screen in one of the biggest dark horses of 2015. Set in a not too distant future after a nuclear holocaust, we see this story through the eyes of Mad Max as he is captured by a local group known as the War Boys, led by Immortan Joe. He is thrust into a cat-and-mouse chase after a driver for Joe, known as Furiosa, played by Charlize Theron, steals his wife's and tries to bring them to the safe haven known as the Green Place. I watched the first two Mad Max films 6 years ago. Whilst I liked them, I don't want to say they've not aged well, but I will admit they're probably products of their times. I could definitely see the influence these films have had on cinema in general, but I wouldn't exactly class myself as a die-hard fan of the series. Not to mention, this new film, Fury Road, went through development hell, and I thought this film would thrive heavily on its fan base. But after seeing this in a cinema, I can easily say this: Mad Max Fury Road is one of my favourite films ever. In a time in cinema when CGI is becoming more laughable and noticeable, you can rest assured knowing that the action in Mad Max Fury Road is practical and it is near death defying. There were actually times in which I was genuinely amazed that the stunts I was seeing on screen were not CGI. This is almost like classic Buster Keaton-esque. Not to mention the level of coordination and attention to detail in a lot of the chase scenes is incredible. There's one scene in particular in a valley through a canyon which is edited and directed to perfection. There's a moment early on in the film when the first sort of big chase scene occurs. There was a moment during this chase when there was a guy on top of a truck. Now, I won't spoil it, but it is one of the coolest images I have ever seen in my life. I turned to my friend, who gobsmacked and enthralled, thinking, oh my goodness, what am I watching? It was the moment when I realised two things. One, this is going to be amazing, and two, this definitely feels like a vintage Mad Max film. Like, it definitely is a Mad Max film, but it's modernised. It's bonkers and nuts, but in the right kind of way. I keep hearing detractors say that there is no story. Bearing in mind this is the fourth film of a franchise that spanned back to the 80s, and George Miller has argued that the films stand alone. You see, the biggest thing I see about the story is that there is obviously a story. It's just a very simple story when you look at it in terms of synopsis. You see, a lot of the storytelling is done visually. Through the eyes of Max, we see this barren wasteland. We see people scrounging for resources. We have a opening voiceover explaining a bit of backstory. We have greedy warlords controlling key resources to control the people. For the lack of story there is, the characters bring this tale to life. Charlize Theron deserves infinite praise as she is almost unrecognizable as Imperator Furiosa, and she steals the show in every scene she is in. She is probably on par with the likes of Ellen Ripley, Sarah Connor, and the bride from Kill Bill in terms of being a strong, kick-ass female lead. She shows mental grit to deliver the wives to a better safe haven and to find her home. Tom Hardy is also very serviceable as Max. He replaces Mel Gibson in the title role and he broods his way mostly through the film. He actually only has very little lines of dialogue. In fact, most of the time he speaks, it's mostly just grunting and doing the Tom Hardy mumble as he normally does in these action films. Nicholas Hoult was very surprising as Warboy Nux. He starts off as a bad character, but we start to see redeeming qualities in him throughout the film. Mad Max Fury Road was probably one of the biggest surprises of last year. In fact, this was probably one of the biggest surprises of this decade. I genuinely did not expect a film directed by a 70-year-old with a 30-year gap between the last film of its series to be this good, especially for a film that went through development hell. This is definitely worth seeing on Blu-ray. I highly recommend it. It was like a jolt of energy. When I left the cinema last year, I had a grin from ear to ear, feeling vitalized by what I just saw. I highly recommend it. You will be in for one hell of a ride. In a visually stunning, barren wasteland. Mad Max Fury Road is definitely 5 stars out of 5.